Welcome to this deep dive on podcast marketing strategies. We're going to be diving into your lecture excerpt today, which
Yeah.
um, seems very timely. I
Mhm.
mean, did you see that over 60% of Americans have listened to a podcast? Wild.
Yeah, it's huge. And what's even more interesting is it's not just the number. It's like, who are these podcast listeners, right?
Yeah.
And the excerpt goes into some demographics, which are really interesting. It's like marketers have found this gold mine, this audience that is really engaged
Mhm.
and really interested in what they're hearing. So,
Yeah, I love that. That reminds me of that saying, content is king, but audience is queen, or something like that, right?
mm.
But, I mean, podcasts, why are they such a gold mine? I think the excerpt really honed in on this idea of authentic engagement, which I think is super key.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because, like, traditional advertising, that's interruptive, right? Like, you're listening to your favorite song, a commercial comes on. But podcasts, they kind of flip that script. It's about building a relationship. It's almost like a friendship. So imagine this. You've got this host that you really trust. They're talking about something you actually care about.
Mm-hmm.
And they recommend something, maybe a product, maybe a service that they actually use. It's subtle, it's integrated, and that's what makes it so powerful.
Okay, I am sold. So let's get into it because the excerpt actually outlines 10 whole strategies to achieve podcast marketing success. So I'm ready to dive in.
Let's do it.
Okay, number one, know your audience. This is more than just basic demographics, though. It's not just age or location. It's about why are they listening to podcasts in the first place? Like, what do you look for in a podcast?
Yeah, totally. It's like throwing a party. You're not just going to like send out invites without thinking about who you're inviting. You want to make sure the music is right, the vibe is good, the food's good. It appeals to the people that are coming to the party.
Okay, yeah, I like that. So in podcasting, understanding your ideal listener, right, their needs and interests, you can then tailor your content to really resonate with them.
Exactly, exactly. And that actually goes right into strategy number 2, which is define your podcast's purpose and its niche. What are you trying to do with this podcast? Like, why does this podcast exist? And what is the unique perspective that you can bring that maybe isn't already like saturated in the market?
Mm-hmm.
You're not trying to appeal to everyone. You're trying to appeal to the right listeners, the ones that are going to become like fans of the podcast.
Yeah, they become fans, they tell their friends. It's about carving out your own space in the podcasting universe.
Yeah.
You're a specialty tea house, not just a generic coffee shop.
Exactly. Exactly. And once you've got that audience, you've got your niche. Strategy number 3 is investing in quality production. And this is a big one. And honestly, I think where a lot of podcasters, especially if they're just starting out, they might stumble a little on this one.
You know what? I'll admit, if I'm listening to a podcast and the audio quality is bad, I have definitely hit stop. I'm like, I can't do this.
Totally. And that's the thing, because if the sound quality is bad, it sounds unprofessional. And it undermines the credibility of what you're trying to say. If you can't be bothered to like edit out the background noise or make sure the audio is clear, like, why should I trust you as a listener? Why should I trust you with my time?
Right, yeah. It's kind of like going to a restaurant that has amazing food but terrible service. You're probably not going to go back.
Exactly.
So good equipment, professional editing, even just like a well-crafted intro and outro, all of that really contributes to a higher quality listening experience.
It tells the listener you value their time.
Okay, that makes sense. And a high-quality product, then that kind of brings us to strategy number 4, which is compelling content. This is where the magic happens.
Yes. And the excerpt talks about storytelling. We are hardwired for stories, right? Like, think about your favorite books, movies, even podcasts. They all tell a story.
Right, because they're engaging, they're memorable, and I think they help us connect with the information on a deeper level.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And then to keep listeners hooked, you got to think about ways to make your content interesting. The excerpts suggest different formats, so instead of just having a solo episode, bring in a guest, like an expert in your field or an influencer or even one of your listeners.
Oh, I love that. That's always so fun when a podcast has guests because it just adds a totally different dimension. It's like you're having a conversation with your friends. It's not just you in a room talking to yourself.
Exactly, exactly. And it makes it way more fun for the listener, but it also expands your audience because now you've got the guests coming on, they've got their own audience, and everybody wins.
Everybody wins. And speaking of reach, that's strategy number 5. Optimize for search and discoverability. Because what good is amazing content if no one can find it, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's like having a storefront on a deserted street. Like, You need to make sure people can actually find you. So that's where SEO comes in. Like, you need to make sure you're using the right keywords in your title, in your description, in your episode notes, so that when people are searching for something that your podcast is about, they can actually find you.
It's like using the right bait to catch the right fish.
Exactly. So let's say your podcast is all about sustainable living. You're going to want to use keywords like eco-friendly living, zero waste, sustainability tips.
Okay, that makes sense. And this is where transcripts are really handy, right?
Yes.
Because not only does it make your content accessible, which is great, but it's also more text for search engines to crawl, which then boosts visibility.
Exactly. Transcripts, they should be your best friend if you're a podcaster. They're essential. Yeah, if you want people to find your podcast, transcripts are key. But even with amazing SEO, you still got to promote your show. Which brings us to strategy number 6. You got to get out there.
Shout it from the rooftops.
Tell everyone and their mother.
Yes. Tell everyone. Use your social media. Think like little bite-sized pieces of your best content.
Yeah.
Like the little graphics with quotes, those. Or even like a fun little challenge.
Oh, yeah.
That connects back to your podcast.
I love that. And don't forget about email lists. I know it's old school in the world of TikTok and everything.
Right.
But it's still such a direct way to connect with your audience.
Totally. You can give updates, behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah.
And, maybe even perks for your listeners who are like your ride or dies.
Oh, I like it.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about building that relationship. And speaking of relationships, strategy number 7, engage with your audience.
Yeah, it's not a one-way street.
Right.
It's a conversation. I love when podcasts have a space for listeners to comment and ask questions, or even just geek out together about the topic,
Yes, building that community, that's like the holy grail of podcasting. Because when people feel heard, they become true fans.
They're not just listeners. They're out there telling everybody, you have to listen to this podcast.
They become like podcast evangelists.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that leads perfectly into the business side of things. Strategy number 8, monetization.
Okay, so I feel like this is where it can get a little tricky, right?
It can.
Because you got to find that balance.
Right.
Making sure your podcast can sustain itself, but also not, selling out.
Right. You don't want to alienate anyone. The excerpt seems to really like sponsorships.
Yeah.
And I think if you can find brands that really match what you believe in, and you can integrate them naturally into your content, it doesn't feel salesy.
Right. No one wants to listen to a podcast that feels like a commercial. What about listener-supported models, like Patreon?
Oh, yeah. Patreon is fantastic because, again, it's like a direct line to your most loyal listeners. They get the bonus content, they get the perks, maybe even a shout-out. And you get that financial stability.
Yeah, it's a win-win.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You could even do merch. Everybody loves a good podcast t-shirt.
Right. But no matter what the key is, be upfront with your listeners. Let them know how you're funding things, why it matters.
Transparency.
Yes, exactly. Transparency builds trust.
I like it. Okay, strategy number 9. This is about the numbers, data, and measuring success. But I feel like it's not about being vain about it.
No.
It's about actually understanding what's working and what's not.
Totally. Like, are people listening? Are your downloads going up? Where's your audience coming from? Are they clicking on your calls to action?
Yeah, are they doing what you're hoping they're going to do and they listen?
Exactly. Because when you have that data, you can make good decisions about your content, marketing, everything.
Totally. Okay, so then that brings us to the final strategy, number 10. And I feel like maybe this is the most important one. Continuously evolve.
It's huge. Because the podcasting world is constantly changing.
Right. What worked yesterday might not work tomorrow.
Exactly.
It's really about staying ahead of the curve.
And it's like learning a language.
Yeah.
You can't just learn a couple phrases and be fluent.
Right.
You got to immerse yourself in the culture.
Oh, I like that.
Learn as you go.
So how can podcasters stay ahead of the game? What does the excerpt recommend?
It says, stay up to date on all the trends. Go to conferences. Listen to other podcasts. Talk to other creators. It's all about connections.
Yeah. And feedback.
Yes.
Your listeners will tell you what they want.
Yeah, they'll tell you. And that's what's so great about podcasting. It really is about that connection, that authenticity.
Yeah, it's you can tell when someone just giving you a sales pitch versus oh my gosh, you have to listen to this,
Totally. It's they're your friend and they're like, dude, I learned about this thing,
Yeah. Okay, so this excerpt, it's given us this like amazing roadmap
Hmm.
to podcasting success, but it also brings up some of the challenges. And I think like one of the big ones, at least that jumped out to me, was this idea of balancing advertising with authenticity. Because as podcasts become more and more popular.
We're seeing more and more brands kind of jump on the bandwagon,
Yeah.
and it brings up these questions of ethics and transparency, which I think are important.
Definitely. It's tricky for sure.
Because I don't want to be listening to a podcast and just feel like I'm constantly being sold to, you know what I mean?
Totally. Because that's when you lose trust, right?
Exactly,
Like, why
exactly.
am I listening to you if you're just trying to sell me something at every turn?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's on the podcaster to be transparent, right? If you're going to have a sponsor,
Right.
be upfront about it. This is my sponsor.
Be honest about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're recommending a product, be like, hey, full disclosure,
Yeah.
I'm getting paid to say this,
Totally.
you know? And then it's up to the listener.
Exactly.
The excerpt also mentions inclusivity in podcasting, which I think is super, super important
Yeah, that's huge.
because podcasts, I feel like they have this unique power to really amplify voices that maybe haven't always been heard
Mm-hmm.
traditionally, you know?
And make everyone feel welcome.
Yes, exactly. It's
Yeah.
about making sure everyone feels seen and heard.
Yeah.
So I guess that comes down to like the language we use,
Mm-hmm.
the guests we have on, the stories that we're choosing to share.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, as we wrap up, I think it's important to remember that we've really just scratched the surface here,
Totally.
right? The world of podcasting is huge, and it is always changing. But you know what? This excerpt has given us some great kind of takeaways.
Yeah, it's a great starting point. It's like know your purpose, invest in quality, engage authentically, and never, never stop learning.
I love that.
Yeah.
Words to podcast by. Thank you so much for diving into this with me, or I should say with us. I know our listeners are getting a lot out of this,
Of course. My pleasure.
but it really makes you think, right? Like, how is this all going to evolve? Because more and more people are starting podcasts every day.
Yeah.
And as that happens, like what new strategies we need to learn? You know,
Right. What's next?
what is next?
Yeah.
That's something for all of us to think about.